I thought that we would conclude this retreat by shifting gears, maybe becoming a little less cerebral and out of the realm of economic and social policy, and talk about what really is truly at stake if this polarization and rural and urban divide continues, which is the ability and the willingness of people to behave and discuss things civilly with one another. We heard today from Senator Corman his concerns about social media and the lack of personalization that it brings, people sitting behind computers and ripping other people apart. We heard his take on the 24-hour news cycle and what that does to our society and is doing to our society. We also heard Dave Reed talk about part of the problem is communication between people, people of different and vastly different communities. And so today's final concluding panel is about how we build connections in our communities across the urban-rural divide in order to reinvigorate civil discourse, which is absolutely critical. I also want to harken back to the thing that I said last night, which was we will continue to learn from the lessons that Mo Coleman has brought to the Institute of Politics. And to me personally, when I was in graduate school, one of the things that I heard over and over and over again from him, and I'm hoping he said it to all students and not just me, but he definitely said it to me a lot, was, Samantha, you need to challenge your assumptions. You need to identify your assumptions. And I think he couldn't be more right now, is that we're all making assumptions about each other depending on where we live. And so in honor of Mo's legacy, I think that this panel is really appropriate, that we all need to think about how we challenge our assumptions, and we're going to hear from these women today about the programs they're building in their own organizations to build urban and rural connections for adults and students. So with that, I'm going to introduce our first guest, which is Purvi Patel. She's from the University of Chicago, and she's Director of Civic and Campus Engagement at the Institute of Politics there. In this role, she advises the IOP civic engagement, student leadership, builds relationships with community partners, and works on civic engagement program development and strategy. She oversees the IOP's Bridging the Divide program, a public service leadership program focused on building relationships, partnerships, and fostering dialogue across urban and rural divisions. Previously, she worked as an administrator in diversity and student life at Washington University in St. Louis, Loyola University in Maryland, and Oberlin College. She is from Dallas, Texas, and graduated with a BA in history from Loyola and a master's from Bowling Green State University. Welcome. Our second and third guests are from Kentucky. And I'll begin with Ada Smith. Ada is from Whitesburg, Kentucky, and currently serves as the Institutional Development Director at Appalshop and is a founding member of the STAY project, Stay Together Appalachia Youth, a youth-led multi-issue regional network. She's a board member of Southerners of New Ground, SONG, a mountain association of community economic development, and the Kentucky Rural Urban Exchange, which is also referred to as RUX. She's a graduate of Hampshire College. Ada was selected as a 2013 Arts and Culture Fellow by the Rockwood Leadership Institute and the 2016 Bali Local Economy Fellow. She's joined, I should mention that Appalshop is an arts organization. She's joined by Savannah Barrett, who is the Exchange Director of Art of the Rural and co-founder of the Kentucky Rural Urban Exchange. Art of the Rural is also an arts-based organization. She serves the board of the Center for Performance and Civic Practice and the Robert E. Gard Foundation, and as an advisor to the Bush Foundation Community Creativity Cohort and the Art of Community. She's widely published essays and interviews. She holds a Master's of Arts Management from the University of Oregon and is an alumnus of the Muhammad Ali Scholars for Peace and Justice at the University of Louisville and from the Kentucky Governor's School for the Arts. Please welcome our guests. So the goal of this panel, as I alluded to, is to do what we've done in the other discussions, is to understand urban and rural communities and the common identities that they have and their distinctive identities. We also are trying to overcome stereotypes and understand how these women are working to do that. And lastly, we'd like to learn the value and limitations of rural and urban exchange programs. So first, I'd like to start with you, Purvi, and ask you about how the University of Chicago and its Institute of Politics first came up with this idea.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to my colleagues and peers and partners in crime at the University of Pittsburgh's Institute of Politics for inviting us to be a part of today's discussion. The Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago has a mission to cultivate and ignite the next generation of young leaders to go into politics and public service, really broadly defined. We're a pretty new organization led by our fearless leader, David Axelrod, that was started about 6 years ago. And for anyone that's familiar with the University of Chicago, I imagine that Penn would fit pretty similarly. It is a really esoteric place. It's a place that's all about the life of the mind, and it feels like the most ivory tower I have ever experienced ever. And the Institute of Politics on that campus is a very different space. We are engaging students and young people extracurricularly in the practice of getting involved in the issues of contemporary today that are right outside their doorstep, and inviting them to be a part of the solution because they are already leading in so many ways, right? I just also want to name that I recognize that yesterday the most substantial data was released that young people, college students, voted at double the rate in this last midterm. So they are already in the process and have a really important and valued voice and deserve our investment. Bridging the Divide was started as a public service leadership program after the 2016 election. We sit on a university campus in an urban community. Most of our institute is comprised of urbanites. We tend to have an urban and a citywide bias, and we certainly have a deep commitment to the city of Chicago broadly. That being said, I think our campus, like many other campuses, can feel like an echo chamber at times. And many of the students, many of the community members, many of our fellow citizens in Chicago and in urban places were surprised by the outcome of the 2016 election. And the initial reaction we saw was a kind of distancing of themselves from the people who thought, who they were perceiving as voting very differently, voting against their humanity, et cetera. And our institute director has spent decades in politics and really wanted to make sure that as we were cultivating the next generation of young folks going into politics and public service, that they were going in hopeful and with the skills and efficacy to work with people who disagreed with them, to see humanity in those who have different lived experiences. And the urban and rural divide, we were thinking about that really structurally when we're thinking about what media sources are people consuming, where are they simply missing the perspective and voice of lived experiences that are very different from their own. And so our program is only about 2 years old, and it focuses on university students, and it's a multi-institutional partnership. We think of a lot in threes in the program. So we have 3 multi-institutional partners. It's University of Chicago, Eureka College downstate in Illinois, which is also the alma mater of Ronald Reagan, and a 2-year open access community college in Chicago in a Jesuit school called Arupe College. We take 30 students on 3 immersion weekends and deeply dive into 3 policy areas and certainly expose students really broadly to politics and public service and the process so that they're getting a sense of how they might contribute. We're exposing students to 3 policy areas and how those policy areas have nuance and difference from an urban perspective and a rural perspective. And we're giving them skills and capacity to dialogue across difference, to actively listen, and to engage in the work of consensus building, both identifying it and putting that into practice. I'll share just a few stories because I like to get out of the way. Our students are truly the beneficiary and the exemplar of how this work is being lived out. One of our students, Hunter, who participated in last year's program, is from Eureka College. He lives in a rural community in Illinois. And one of the signature experiences in the program is that the students get to sit in a political focus group. And they are not participants of the focus group, they're observing a focus group of urban and rural voters. And after sitting in the urban focus group of Hillary voters at the 2016 election, one of the tropes and caricatures that was mentioned was that downstate voters, rural voters, are backwards, they're uneducated, they can't be helped. And there's no reason or motivation to want to connect with them. And this student, who is a rural student, whose father did vote for Trump, talked about in his reflection back, my dad voted for Trump because he works in a coal-fired plant. And in my town, I have seen people grappling with unemployment. And Trump was the only candidate that said, coal-fired plants, my dad's job, is not gonna go away. So that is one experience that happened at the start of the day. In the second half of the day, this was our weekend in Chicago and our first weekend and our first day of programming. We had a student from Purvi College, Egypt, who lives on the southwest side of the city, who lives in a neighborhood that's predominantly Black, while engaging with an economic development practitioner and a policymaker in the city of Chicago, said, everything that you're talking about sounds great in terms of the investment that you all are making in the city of Chicago. And here again, my neighborhood is being left behind. The talk that the accomplishments that you're touting of the investments that have been made in the economic growth and development that have happened in the city of Chicago are not affecting my lived experience. And with that, over the course of that first day, Hunter and Egypt were able to build a point of connection, that both of their communities economically were being left behind. And so what did that mean for what they hadn't learned about one another, and how did that mean that they were gonna move forward together and thinking about some of the same issues that we were gonna continue to engage over the course of our time together.
Did they develop a relationship and
a
friendship out of that?
Absolutely. And the thing that I would say is, and something that we were talking about behind the scenes, is that sometimes there is a flattening of the urban and rural conversation, and specifically of the rural conversation as just equating to white conservative, usually male too. And that is, if we are thinking about an urban and rural conversation as post-racial, you're missing the mark, and anything you do is gonna be tone deaf and not as effective. And so consistently throughout the program, we were engaging pretty deeply in issues of race and racism. We couldn't tease that apart. It was not a separate conversation, it was a part of the conversation. And the coaching and advice that I would give to folks who are about to embark on similar kinds of program development work or similar kinds of investment to young people is that if you were to think of them as separate, it will fall short. And it will not engage with the issues that are really driving the distance and the distrust and the divide. And so you have to have really skillful facilitation, and it's gonna feel pretty uncomfortable at multiple points throughout the conversation. But that is essential, and without it, it will be not as effective.
Let me ask you a question about how you recruit students to that program.
Yeah.
Do you find that they are self-selecting to attend, and does that bias the experience in the program, or do you need to actively recruit folks who have different ideologies and come from different communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly, I've run a number of different dialogue programs, not just based on the urban and rural divide. Students who self-select to participate, that certainly is a concern, and it's fair to bring it up. The thing that I want to say that is my other key recommendation that I'm going to it's going to be on my soapbox, I'm going to shout from the rooftops about it, is that we know that our educational system is inequitable, and that places like institutions like the one that I'm a part of often are not reflective demographically of a broad range of voices. And so for us, we do feel like, even though there was probably some selection bias and the participants who could give their time and who could engage, the magic of the program was actually that it was a multi-institutional partnership, and that we weren't partnering with, and we like to partner with Harvard, that's cool, but that we weren't partnering with Harvard and Penn and GW's Institute of Politics, which we do have really good working relationships with, and that we were really deeply investing in thinking of ourselves as an anchor institution for the state, and building relationships cross-institutionally with institutions that wouldn't be on the same US News list as us, but where the young people have a deeply important voice and just as much insight and just enough enormous, tremendous public service potential that we would be engaging with our students and their students as peers and try to find equilibrium in that way. So that's what I would say about that. And that, I think, changed the dynamic from if I would have run the program just within my institution. I think it would have felt very, honestly, paternalistic.
And you brought a video with you to share with the group that shows the students' experiences. Can we play that video? Thanks, Aaron.
What is very, very clear is that people in our metropolitan areas and oftentimes on campuses view the Trump supporters as toothless, ignorant racists. And that really isn't fair. By the same token, it is not right to assume that everyone who opposes Trump is for open borders and are socialists. Also unfair. And these are the caricatures we're trying to penetrate.
Organizers of the Bridging the Divide program hope that educating college students on the hot topics of the day, especially how they're perceived by rural and urban populations, will inspire a better dialogue for the leaders of tomorrow.
Each school group visits the other's community.
We're going to be visiting something that's called the Reagan Peace Garden.
On this trip, students from Arupe College, a 2-year degree program in the heart of Chicago, and students from the University of Chicago visited Eureka's campus in rural Illinois.
Ronald W. Reagan was a student here at Eureka College, graduated in June of 1932.
One of the Republican Party's greatest icons, President Ronald Reagan, is a graduate of Eureka. During these visits, conservative and liberal-leaning students are pushed to talk about their different perspectives.
They're skeptical about politics and the direction of things, but they're not cynical. And they really believe that they have the capacity to change things.
The students also watched focus groups. One, a group of Trump voters from a rural community, and the other, a group of Hillary Clinton voters from the city. Political opinions ran deep. We were asked not to identify focus group participants.
Do you think it's fair to say that both of the groups we saw in some ways lived in a bubble? What was your reaction?
I noticed with both of the focus groups how close-minded each of the parties are. They both talked about how the only way to bridge the divide is to sit down and talk, but they both kind of raised the issue that the other party doesn't want to talk. And
there's just a lot of fear mongering, and I think it was very evident in the way that they discussed illegal immigrants, just the fear mongering that takes place.
The students heard hurtful stereotypes in both groups they watched. Some rural students heard participants from the Hillary Clinton supporter focus group describe their communities in ways that they felt were offensive.
They definitely didn't understand what, I'm about. They never met me, but they dropped words like uneducated and ignorant.
They almost stereotyped the us down here as a sexist, racist for being a Trump supporter.
While some urban students felt issues surrounding race were dismissed.
I think coming from their perspective, they were saying, well, we don't see color, we see everybody as equal. If you don't see my color, then I feel like you don't see me.
It's a great video. I think it shows a learning process that the students are going through. I have two questions. The first is, do the focus group participants hear all of this and get that feedback?
No, they don't. And the one area of consensus that the focus group both had is that they have critiques of young people. So that felt really frustrating for the young folks to listen to as well. But no, they didn't. It was expertly facilitated by David Binder Research, and and it was for students to also see the process of the focus group taking place and know that that's another way that they can get engaged.
I'm going to save my final question for both of you, both organizations, for the end. So can we switch gears and move over to the Art of the Rural and Appalshop? My first question, if you could share with the audience, your arts organizations, and you are involved in this type of programming, and I think you've been involved in this type of programming since 2013, well ahead of the 2016 election when the rest of us had an aha moment that we were talking past each other. Talk to us about how you were so prescient and knowing that this was a need that needed to happen.
So I can speak from the perspective of how we started the Rural Urban Exchange and say that, so I co-founded the exchange with Josh May, who was Ada's colleague at Appalshop, although Ada has been around from the beginning as well. And both of our families had been affected by big shifts in Kentucky, signature economies in tobacco and coal, in auto manufacturing. And we had seen a lot of young folks in our communities migrate to different regions of the state, both rural to rural and urban, or rural to urban. And we understood that these economic transitions had created both an opportunity for communities to reinvent themselves and a really significant need for people to collaborate across the state's distinct and historically separated counties and regions. And we understood that the migration that it had catalyzed across the state had opened an opportunity for folks to begin to translate value from one region to the other. And we were really excited by the potential of folks to share the value across and then begin to lead collaborations and take that back home with them. So we started from a place of recognizing opportunity and understanding from our lived experience that there was tension between rural and urban places, and that tension was based a lot on flattening and on just a lack of nuance and context between the two.
And Ada, you have a personal story. Do you mind sharing that? And when you do so, talk about the origins of Appalshop.
Yeah, of course. Great to be with you all this afternoon. And yeah, I just wanted, one of the reasons it's so exciting for me to be in Pittsburgh and to be invited to speak at this is because my county, a town in my county, Jenkins, was built in 1912 by Consolidation Coal Company. So, you know, here we are 100 plus years later, and literally 100,000 acres in my county were owned by Western Maryland and eventually Western Pennsylvania. And what's interesting about that is, you know, literally there's no town in this community at all, and one corporate company headquartered in this region of the country built it from the ground up, owned everything, all the houses, the sidewalks, the schools, the hospital, the store. I mean, you know, classic company town. And what's interesting is by the 1950s, when Pittsburgh Coal had become a part of Consolidation Coal and moved to Pittsburgh, my papa was underground working in a Consolidation Coal mine, and that coal mine got sold to Bethlehem Steel. And he was employed by Bethlehem Steel for a number of years, and my dad was born. And it's one of these really interesting situations where, you know, we've got huge urban areas with major corporations who have owned and operated a variety of rural economies for a really, really long time. And we've been very interconnected, very, very interconnected. By the time my dad graduates from high school, 1970, almost 2/3 of his class were leaving the coal fields because mechanization had happened in the coal mines, and there were not the number of jobs that there had been in my grandfather's generation. And what's interesting is we had also had the Johnson administration, War on Poverty had started, and there was this interesting group in New York City who got an Office of Economic Opportunity grant to start these community film workshops in different pockets of poverty in the country. There was actually one in Chicago, there was one in Harlem, it was a lot of urban spots. One ended up in Whitesburg, Kentucky. And my dad was in high school, the son of a coal miner, decided to be a part of a community film workshop, learn how to operate 16mm film cameras, video equipment, these huge editing suites that cost now $30,000 to even operate, and got trained in this kind of new burgeoning career. You could say app development, or someone was talking about earlier, is like a new technology of today, right? The young people who were trained through that program for 2 years, through this federal program that a group in New York City decided to start, realized all of a sudden they had some great new skill that they wanted to bring to the late 20th century, and yet those economies weren't in rural areas. And if they were gonna take these skills and go do something with them, they'd have to leave. So instead, that group of young people, they're all late teens, early 20s, decided to form a nonprofit. We started this organization, Appalshop, that I work for. It's APPAL, like Appalachian. And those young people continued to document and tell the stories of Central Appalachia because they felt like there was a whole misperception, even during the War on Poverty, right? Of like what communities dealing with poverty, what was happening there, what the assets they had, stories that they were losing. And so now we have a $2 million nonprofit. It employs 22 people full time, a lot of them artists and cultural workers, in a place that is dealing with 30-40% poverty rates, right? And in a place that is 2 hours plus from any mid-sized city like Johnson City, Tennessee, Bristol, like no major city. And what's been really important to me is I ended up growing up among artists, cultural workers, also my family that were in the coal industry, railroad workers, you name it, the kind of industry trail. And what became very present to me of the 21st century generation is that if I was also going to stay in my own community, which my dad paved the way for, I was going to have to make social connections beyond the rural place that I lived in, right? I had to have relationships with people in other places to either attract money for community development efforts, attract capital that had been extracted through resources over a very long period of time. And that if Eastern Kentucky and young people in our places were going to have the opportunity that, we move, it's not across the street that we can move, right? We're talking about hours, states away, that we were just going to have to figure out how to at least get to know folks in other places, understand them better, and mostly have them understand us, right? But we can't ask for people to see us differently if we're not willing to go listen to them. And so one of the most exciting things was Savannah had come to Appalshop, my coworker Josh and her had gotten really excited, and to be frank, I was like very skeptical of this like statewide exchange. I was like, people in these big cities don't care about us. They don't want to understand what's going on. And yet, it was true, as Savannah mentioned, so many people that I grew up with had moved to Louisville, Kentucky, Lexington, Kentucky. And so the idea that those places didn't understand us was also like a falsity I had created, because actually they were full of people from my communities that had moved there for a variety of reasons. And so it's been really exciting to watch this Kentucky Rural-Urban Exchange grow, and I want Savannah to break down the mechanisms because she's just way better at it than I am. But I want to say that so much of it to me is about understanding our long histories of collaboration and exchange. This did not just start 5 years ago, not just the program, right? But this goes back to our grandparents, right? And what they felt like was possible. It then goes back to what our parents felt like was possible, and then to us. And for those of us who remain in rural communities, right, it's been like this generational question of can we stay where we are, and yet also a generational attachment and understanding that urban areas have been so important to our livelihoods, right? We can't divorce ourselves from urban places, and we don't want to, right? And so I think the exchange process has really been a way for people to build healthier social capital. I thought it was really amazing how important he was talking about that neighborhood cohesion, and that like, I want to invite you to my community, I want you to invite me to your community, but then I want us to go somewhere we've never been together, because there's so many new questions that come up in that experience as well. And so that kind of experiential relationship building in place has been what's so key to me about this exchange program we've been talking about, and I think what you're speaking to, Purvi.
Savannah, do you want to break that down?
Sure, yeah, and I will just offer a little bit of context to let you know where I'm coming from. So I'm a 12th generation Grayson County and in Western Kentucky. Talk about our grandparents' intersections. My mama and papa were both United Auto Worker, union organizers. My mama worked in a factory in Western Kentucky. My papa took a trailer to Louisville and then later Springfield, Ohio, and worked through the week and came home for the weekends, right? And they told me when we watched Harlan County, USA, that they had sent money all through the 70s and 80s to the striking mine workers in Eastern Kentucky. So this kind of exchange and interconnection is pretty old. I'll also share that I live in Louisville, Kentucky, in the most diverse zip code in the state of Kentucky. About 40 languages are spoken every day in the high school. So my rural-urban exchange experience is also very personal. We own 6 acres in my home place, and we live in the city where my partner's from. I will also say that Art of the Rural as an organization is a national organization that works to connect communities, cultivate dialogue, and forward rural-urban exchange. And we do that through national conferences like the Rural Generation Initiative that just brought folks from 44 states and 2 territories together in Mississippi to really explore the rural dimension of equity, and also in regional projects like the Kentucky Rural Urban Exchange. So just want to offer a little bit of context and then take you through a quick presentation to give you a sense of what it looks and feels like. So RUX, the Kentucky Rural Urban Exchange, was started 6 years ago in partnership with Appalshop. It is an arts-based leadership program designed to build confidence, grow social capital, and bridge divides to unite Kentuckians. Each year, the program accepts 75 members into a cohort working across the arts, agriculture, small business and local economies, community development, education, and health. In an intensive series of 6 conferences over 2 years, members hone leadership and professional skills while exploring all the state has to offer. So engaging with the culture, the foodways, the creativity, the nature, identity, and context that's defining Kentucky in the 21st century. The framework that guides these intensives is focused on people, place, and partnership. And we nurture a literacy of Kentucky's diverse identities, histories, and cultures, while at the same time working with members to tell their own story, to develop intercultural competence, and to teach practical strategies to advance their work at home. The program explores the issues by getting to know those most affected. So square dancing with folks in recovery at an addiction treatment facility, getting to know immigrants and refugees over traditional Bosnian coffee service in a mosque, having lunch at a tobacco farm that has transitioned to a vegetable CSA farm, or discussing military service in Kentucky while staying on an Army base. We understand that building a sense of place relies on immersive experiences, so we do our work in the community. Considering the future of the coal transition in eastern and western Kentucky on the top of a reclaimed surface mine, for example, or teaching network strategies in the side yard of the African American Museum in Bowling Green, or mapping our regional futures on the steps of the Eastern Kentucky Social Club in Lynch. We emphasize arts and culture as key to the strategy of leadership development because we believe that true leadership is a process of deepening connection to others. Why is this important? Because the future of our Commonwealth, and our whole country really, relies on leaders who value the diverse people, cultures, and regions of Kentucky, who can build support across these diversities, and who can collaborate to leverage these resources to achieve statewide prosperity. So by building our programs to help members deeply connect with people and places, we're building pathways to more engaged, meaningful interaction across difference. When members describe RUX, they describe a heightened sense of belonging, feeling inspired with new ideas to get projects off the ground, and feeling more confident that they possess the skills and connections necessary to effect change in their own communities. Since 2014, RUX has hosted 16 intensives in 10 communities in every region of the state. We've coached 240 Kentuckians from 42 counties, from the river cities of Louisville and northern Kentucky to the Appalachian Mountains to the Mississippi River Delta. The result is an invaluable network of friends and colleagues from all walks of life and every region of the state. What we've learned this morning and what we've learned in Kentucky are that the only way to grow social mobility is to level the playing field. And we believe that in doing so, you have to invest in people in place. So you have to grow individual skills and confidence. You have to build social capital and connect networks. And you have to expand the familiarity with models and best practices for collaboration. And that leads you to a more connected place where people have the skills they need to design the interventions and policies that are necessary to reinvent their own places. You know, some of these policies aren't working because they're not being designed by people who have experienced the inequities that are driving the persistent poverty. And so we're really excited that now REX has begun to receive a lot of national recognition and investment. We're developing a suite of case studies for the National Endowment for the Arts, so you'll be able to read about some of the strategies that we're using in Kentucky. And we're also working with the McKnight Foundation in Minnesota to support a replication process. So soon we'll also have a technical assistance protocol that you could, we would send a team to help you build a rural-urban exchange. So in closing, the heart of this work is that connection is both the impact that we seek and the starting place. We know that rural and urban places are vitally interdependent. In the New York Times 2 days ago, Sarah Schmarsh explained that we have a shared future, that our food economies, that our natural resources, that our broader economies and that our political movements are inextricably linked. And we understand that we have a divide that people are really worried about. 80% of people in this country, when polled by the Wall Street Journal, said that they feel the country is divided, and 90% say that they feel that's a real problem. From red and blue states to digital obsession to the opioid epidemic, I believe that this division is really a crisis of isolation, and that people more urgently seek social cohesion than ever before. So, we know that we offer a tested strategy for connection in a moment in a crisis of divisiveness. And we really look forward to sharing what we've learned with you all. In that spirit, we have a video that can tell you about just one of our intensives last month in Muhlenberg County in the western Kentucky coal fields.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm an active coal miner. I've stood on a seam of coal 100 feet at night, and I can see the tree roots hanging off the wall 100 feet up. And I was looking at a snapshot of time, 300 million years that's transpired on this world we live on. And I want you young people to understand the transition that you are about to make.
We've become a lot more secure in just hanging out with people that think like us, that believe like us, that have the same backgrounds that we do.
Every region in Kentucky has its own identity, but it's disjointed because we don't have a way to facilitate conversations from east to west.
What that lack of connection does is break down the sort of social cohesion that keeps us together as a community. And things like RUCs help to reinforce that foundation that is so core both to having a pleasant life and enjoying your neighbors, but also our democracy and the thing that brings us together as a people.
We use story circles as a tool to think about different topics and ideas. That really gives you an opportunity to get to know your neighbors more and to really grow on your own.
Tell us your enlistment story. When did you join? Why did you join? What branch?
The value, I think, in these type of weekends, and the value that I wanted to have, was to have that real kind of pure exchange of knowledge, exchange of experiences.
I think you would be surprised by the understanding and compassion that you would find in someone in a uniform.
There aren't many opportunities that we have to actually just be brought together and have conversations and find the commonalities where they exist. And that aspect of our life, that piece is so critical, and Rux really does that.
Getting an opportunity to see a community or a topic through someone else's eyes gives you an opportunity to learn more about those people, possibly change your opinion, learn more about your own culture through their eyes.
This is a really great opportunity and a great chance to not just focus on yourself, but to focus on grow as a whole community. So getting to know actually the people who are making the changes.
We have these things that are in common across our communities, no matter where those communities are located. And there is no tool aside from Rux that I know of that can really bring that message home.
1, 2, 3.
So as Savannah said, we are experiencing as a society a crisis of isolation. And I thought that these two programs offer some real tangible paths to maybe overcome some of that isolation and put a dent in the problems that we're seeing right now. I'm going to open this up for question and answers at this point in time, but I wondered if you would give these women a round of applause for the